Who does architecture serve? Today, architecture is largely serves the marketplace. When architecture is in service to communities, creates agency. A community project is about respect, about reverence for community, and it's about affection. But the guru is the land. Guru is the ground. As long as we listen to the guru, we can do no wrong. What does it mean to build a sustainable airport? Architecture that is both socially, culturally, and ecologically relevant. Talk about values of sustainability, talk about incredible design. Can we create a kind of community in this forest?
That being said, this evening we have with us none other than architect Kapil Gupta of Siriyari Architects.
Rather than just showing the work of the office, I think this little presentation maybe talks about some larger values that I think as we've grown as an office that we've come to enjoy in the kind of works that have kind of come our way. I'd of course like to start with, a kind of very simple question. Who does architecture serve? So I think it was Aldo Rossi who said that the architecture of an era is in service of the dominant powers of that time. So what does that mean? It essentially means that it was probably historically the church, it were empires, it were emperors, who actually built cities, who created monuments and things like that. But in the contemporary times that we actually live in, I could say that architecture is largely serves the marketplace. It largely serves commercial interest. So essentially, here's the other conjecture. So when architecture is in service to communities with no commercial interest, what does it do? It creates agency. Agency to reclaim its social role, to be born out of shared values, to engender shared experiences that are embedded within, that can be embedded within architecture, that is both socially, culturally, and ecologically relevant. So essentially today I'm going to present, just 3 projects where, architecture is manifest as a kind of community project. And these will essentially work across 3 scales. The first project is, it's not even my project, which I will explain. The first project is at the scale of a small city when you talk about impact, about social impact. The second project is at the scale of a small town or a small township. And the third project is at the scale of an actual village. So the first project that I'd like to introduce is kind of interestingly a project that I had the privilege in 2022 of being invited for the Aga Khan Awards, where I was a reviewer. Now the way that the awards work, and I think which is what makes it quite remarkable, that while fundamentally the Aga Khan Award scheme is, deals largely with architecture development in Muslim communities, but what it embodies is this idea of inclusivity and care. So the Aga Khan Awards are actually given out after a very rigorous process of evaluation. So in kind of 2022, when I was invited to actually participate as an actual reviewer, I was quite excited because, I really wanted to know how does this actually function. So there I was, shipped off to Indonesia to review 2 projects. One was a affordable housing project, which I thought, wow, that makes sense. There is all of this work that's happening in that part of the world, which would be beautiful to see. And the second was an airport. I was like, what? And how did an airport actually make it to the shortlist? And that, I think, is where, I was very, very pleasantly surprised. But in any case, just to kind of go back to the award itself. So, in this day and age where generally, when we talk about architecture awards, who do we award? You award the architect. We don't award the ecosystem. The people that actually came together to make a piece of architecture manifest. And I think this is what makes the Aga Khan Award so special, because it doesn't just award the architect, it awards the client, it awards the contractor, it awards the artisans, anybody who may have been an important part of this ecosystem to actually manifest an actual project. So that is essentially, what I actually went out to do, to excavate the people behind and the manifestation of these two amazing projects. So here you go. I mean, the first project, the project that I'm going to be talking about is the Banyuwangi Airport, a project that was finished, I think, in about 2018. Construction started around 2011. But I met Dr. Abdullah Anwar Anas, and he just blew me away. So Dr. Anas, he became the regent of essentially Banyuwangi, which is a regency in East Java, so it's right next to Bali. And he grew up there. He grew up in basically in Banyuwangi, and there was this deep reverence for its natural habitat, its resources, its ecology. And he wanted to transform Banyuwangi. But what he didn't want to do was to see the same kind of environmental degradation that he witnessed in Bali, which is not maybe 50 kilometers to the west. He was absolutely clear. So if he was to look at the economic development of Banyuwangi, it could not happen through exploitative development. It had to be a sustainable process. So he became regent in maybe 2011. For the next 4 years, what he essentially did was to bring Banyuwangi onto the global map. Essentially through various ecotourism ventures, he began to invite people, to really come in and explore its nature, its habitat, its biodiversity. But eventually he kind of realized that Banyuwangi did not have an international airport, and he needed to put this airport on the global map. Now this is an image of the people who were actually involved, right? Your local government, the residents, the entire the team of architects that actually came together to make this project happen. This, for me, was the first community-led project, infrastructure project that I have ever encountered. And it was the experience of just seeing how this project was manifest is what just completely blew my mind. So essentially, he realized, okay, I need to build an international airport. The current, occupancy, or rather of the existing airport was barely I think about maybe around 10,000 people. He needed to escalate that to an airport that could service maybe 300,000 people and eventually to maybe 3 million people. And that was his ambition. But he realized that if he went to the Indonesian government and he asked them for basically money, that would be the end of it, because it would become a commercial project. He would have no control. He would not be able to guide its actual development. So he said, I'm going to self-fund the project. So what does it mean? How do you self-fund an international airport? And I think this was incredible, because this is where he said, no, I'm going to find people who can help me. I'm going to find resources that I can possibly kind of put together to kind of fund the construction. I'm going to work with an architect who essentially embodies this idea of understands what does it mean to build a sustainable airport. Essentially means no air conditioning. This airport had to be completely naturally ventilated. He wanted this airport to embody the values of sustainability, what you also see in the traditional houses of kind of Banyuwangi, which I'll also just kind of talk about. So he brings this incredible group of of people together. No international consultants, all of them local. And how do you build a massive, well, it wasn't massive, it's a fairly, I would say, modest hotel, but no large budgets, no glass and steel, a placeless architecture of airports that we actually see today. And I think this is what is incredible. So this is the image or the photograph that I first took when I arrived at the site. So out of maybe 20 projects every year that are nominated or shortlisted, 6 projects win the Aga Khan Awards, and Banyuwangi Airport won essentially that year. I was able to convince the master jury that, my goodness, look at this project. Talk about a model for social inclusion. Talk about a community-led project. Talk about values of sustainability. Talk about incredible design. So Andra Martin, who's now a very good friend of mine, he's a saint, right? When you actually meet Andra, I mean, it's just incredible, his aura. And they came together, and, it's not about altruism anymore. And I think I slowly come to realize this, that a community project, finally, at the end of the day, is about respect, about reverence for community, and it's about affection. And it's so clear to see as I, interviewed people. But what blows you away is that an airport surrounded by paddy field. Where in the world would you actually see this? Airports are normally surrounded by hotels, by convention centers, right? I mean, they are major, sinks for kind of global capital. Whereas over here, there was none of that. He, in fact, created a 20-kilometer no development zone around the airport because he wanted to preserve the livelihood of all of the farmers that worked in this area where the airport was to be built. So talk about maintaining, that local context and not disrupting and, the lives of people. So, I didn't fly into kind of Banyuwangi. It's only I kind of flew out. But essentially, what you see is incredible. It's just 2 very simple roof forms, right? These diaphanous kind of hip-end roofs, these beautiful, or these timber skylights, which just kind of, actually cap the top. And essentially, that's a simple cross-ventilation system, allows the air through and essentially out. Yeah, no worries. So, I mean, it's a fairly small hotel. It's a fairly small airport. It's about 1 lakh square feet. Very simple. It's like the old airports, right, where you walk onto the tarmac and you kind of go to the plane. So there's a very short distance, right, that you have to actually travel from the land side to the air side. So, actually, fairly easy to actually move through. And the entire airport, as you can see, incredibly simple materials. It's all, it's a concrete frame structure. All the details, etc., all the timber work is all by local craftspeople. They use, a wood there called ulin, which is, I guess, a kind of ironwood. But let me just go back to probably what was the most dramatic element, is that the entire roof of the airport was just draped, in lawn. So when you approach, you don't see the airport. It blends into the paddy fields all around. But why did he use essentially the lawn is an insulator, which essentially, keeps the spaces under the, under the roof, fairly cool. And again, as I said, just so in its actual simplicity in the way that it actually manifests. And it bears all the qualities, in fact, of, a domestic space. the detailing, the screens, the actual timber work, the idea of courtyards that you find, within the airport as you move through them. There's always a gentle breeze that is blowing around you as you kind of move through the space. And probably, this one element that just was so sweet. On the first floor, he created these viewing decks. If you remember the viewing galleries of old, where you would, wave out to people who were leaving or greet people who were actually coming. One of the other major functions of this airport was to allow, the Muslim community to fly out to Hajj, to go to Mecca, which otherwise there would be no direct flight. So he transformed the lives of people simply by not just opening up the world, but allowing them access to one of their most sacred sites. So the airport all of a sudden wasn't just economic artifact, a piece of infrastructure, but fundamentally was a social project. It was driven by a leader who understood the values that he wanted to actually keep through the community. This is just an actual image of, these roofs is of the actual Osan tribe, right? So you actually see that same profile, which you find in the actual houses, the traditional settlements. You can actually see that same kind of form on the roof, but of course expanded into a large kind of diaphanous element. So here, just in basically C-section, you can see how the roof gently floats above both the departure as well as the kind of arrival halls. So incredibly elegant, incredibly simple. It's it's not an airport that's trying to shout out its actual presence. It beautifully sits in this actual landscape. And when you see this image, it's just like, it's so evocative, right? And you can see how, when you're in the interior looking up, this beautiful light that just kind of percolates in, it creates this beautiful kind of shade and shadow as you kind of move through the airport. So it is, in a certain sense, an exquisite piece of architecture, and one which came entirely out of a community-led development, which had incredible people kind of coming together to create, in my view, an exceptional piece of architecture. Yeah. The next project that I'd like to show you is at the scale of a small township. In 2011, I think, we kind of won a competition. This was for the Srimad Rajchandra Mission, which is an ashram, where a very dynamic leader, Rakesh Bhai, who is trying to bring Jainism to the youth, to kind of reimagine, to kind of reinvent it, to kind of draw, young people, in and begin to understand and to kind of practice, the ideas of kind of Jainism, but, within a whole new kind of format. So when we first arrived at the site, as you can see, it's this kind of crescent-shaped plot, about 250 acres, and the idea was that eventually the ashram would grow from, where we were in 2011, to finally become home to about maybe 10,000 people. So in a certain sense, for us, this was another community project. But what is amazing, again, is, the kind of people that actually came together to kind of see this actual project through. So here you can just see, initial visualization of the project. What you have is the housing on the slopes, and at the apex of the hill was the actual temple, what we call the spiritual complex, the large Swadhyay hall or the Satsang Hall, and of course the actual dining, which could feed about maybe 25,000 people a day. The Satsang Hall is essentially, what I am going to kind of talk about. So this is a very beautiful photo that was taken by actually one of the kids who was just flying a drone one morning, and I think it's a very beautiful image because it just kind of encapsulates that kind of quietude, that stillness. of heart and mind that you kind of need to evolve or to move around or to move on, on your actual spiritual path. But this is the building. I mean, it's been in the news a fair bit. But this, again, we've won awards on this actual project, but it just feels that, I mean, how can you not talk about the people that kind of came together to actually make an actual project like this happen? This would have never happened. This would have never happened if it wasn't for the years of basically dialogue, right? So when we talk about years, I'm talking about a 12-year journey. 12 years at the ashram to make it happen. And we finally, we have got to a point where we were no longer even calculating man hours, right? We're talking about, we did an actual rough math about maybe 600, maybe site visits across 11 years. Maybe 2,500, 3,000 drawings. So you get to an actual point where I guess you're just motivated because there is a much larger idea, there's a much larger goal, there is no commercial interest, there is aspiration. And as an architect, for you to be able to somehow bring all of this together, but also work with this incredibly dynamic group of people. I mean, not to kind of romanticize this, but it's such a beautiful word, seva, right? That you will do because you want to serve. And that spirit is something that has imbued this project from the day that we actually started it. And that is really what allowed us to do what we do. That's me and my partner, Chris. When we first actually visited the site in 2011, and of course, it was an incredible visit. We were just kind of getting to know one another. But subsequently, this is how we would have our meetings, right? And over the years, we went from a kind of client-consultant relationship to collaborators and eventually friends and compatriots. And I just think the evolution of that relationship was just so beautiful. As architects, we don't talk about this. We don't talk about the beauty of our relationships and that what we get over and above, say, professional recognition. I mean, what is that? You won an award today or yesterday is news tomorrow. People don't remember. But I think what we carry with us are those friendships and those relationships, and those will last you a lifetime. This is, of course, the staff at Siri. Over 15 years, people came, people left, everyone contributed. This sense of collective ownership, I just think is something that is so special. So in any case, we go back to that whole process. So I think we spent 2 years just form finding. Okay, what is the form of the Satsang Hall? What is it going to be? I mean, so we did master classes in sacred architecture with the guru and the entire team. And, what is sacred? Is it just about, your eye being drawn upwards? Oh, no, I don't think that option works. We were trying, we were looking at going back to Greek architecture, looking at your platonic solids, volumes, pure volumes, or your pagodas, all kinds of forms. Oh, that looks too Buddhist. Oh, that. So I could see the ashram striving for a kind of symbol, which could in a certain sense capture their imagination and is something that would be emblematic of their ambitions as a spiritual organization. And so here we are in iteration number 23, I think, right? And then finally, you have that spire at the bottom right. And we said, oh, okay, chalo. I think this looks nice. It's quite beautiful. It's like this beautiful marble tent that actually sits on a water body, on a beautiful plinth, which is where we'd have this hall. The Satsang Hall, if I may just say, was supposed to be designed for, it had to have an auditorium that could seat 5,000 people. It had museums, it had classrooms, it had other meditation spaces, it had other discourse spaces, so it was a fairly large program. And so we had already started engineering when Rakesh Bhai, the actual guru, came to me and he says, Kapil, one more time, let's try it again. I was like, okay, chalo, yeah, let's do this. And somehow that is where we kind of came across this beautiful painting, this in kind of Jain theology of the Samavasaran, which is this kind of tiered platform, which kind of, kind of reducing to the actual top, almost kind of ziggurat-like, but on every layer you've got humans, or your demigods, animals, in divine communion with the Tirthankara at the top. So this idea of ascension, this idea of divine kind of communion, this idea of a tiered structure is what then finally became the DNA of the actual project. And in a certain sense, also drawing on, say, a lot of principles of, Hindu or I would say temple design, which is essentially about additive and aggregative form, right? Where essentially you're looking at the kind of the repetition and the scaling of self-similar elements. So the smallest element essentially is repeated and scaled. And interestingly, the shikharas, which you see at the bottom, are but iterative examples of that same kind of line of reasoning, right? Which can lead to kind of your drastically your different form. And that is essentially where we started, or where we kind of ended up with. I'll just 1 second, sorry. Okay, we'll stick with that. So this is the plan at the apex of the hill with the Jain temple to the right, the actual Satsang Hall in the middle, and the kind of your dining pavilions on the left. And the plan of the which I'll also get to. The plan of the Satsang Hall, again, is kind of very interesting. You don't do circular auditoriums. Why? They're just acoustically poor, right? But the Guru he said, how can you bring 5,000 people close to me? I want to feel people. I want them to be close to me. And I think the circle really was the most effective form that allowed us to kind of bring the audience as close to the Guru as is actually possible. So this is, an image of the building as it was actually completed. And I'll just talk about the structure. So what is interesting is this kind of mandala-like form is essentially entirely structural. So what you have is, in terms of this idea of kind of form that, steps up to an actual central volume, but at the same time is about aggregation. So it is about the rotation of self-similar walls or kind of volumes which keep rotating 45 degrees as you go from one tier to the other. So it's an aggregation of basically 13 volumes, all of which hold the various programs that we had to kind of place around the actual main auditorium. What is interesting is if you see the box in the middle is actually held by the structure below, which is how we managed to create this very, very large span format. So this is, in a sense, the DNA of the structure. So 4 large arches that intersect to be able to span 54 meters, but the square that is in the center that is created by the intersection is essentially where the meditation hall at the top actually caps out. You've got 4 circulation cores on the 4 corners, and you come up to the upper level, that's a balcony, and now you can begin to see the slow rotation of these volumes as you go from one level to the next. This is the museum and the library, and as you keep going up, this is the museum and the actual library. The one below was the actual balcony, and finally the final rotation essentially gives you 4 discourse halls with the meditation hall in the center, which is essentially the crown of the building. Yeah, and yes, it is quite something. The building is completely clad in hand-cut marble. I'll talk a little bit more about it. But what's quite beautiful is you've got 13 volumes, which means you've got about 35 different faces to the building, which turn away into different directions. So you've got the sun that hits the building from different angles. And I think it just changes through the day as you move around it because it is a kind of symmetrical volume. And, it's just beautiful because, everyone's also dressed in white. The building is white. The plaza is white. It's all marble also because it gets very hot. And the marble really allows you to walk across a fairly hot plaza. But here you can also see the distribution of the circles on the facade, which are calibrated to just bring the right amount of light in, but also not let a lot of heat actually get into the building. So the thermal mass of the structure actually creates, actually very cool interior spaces. And then here is where you actually enter. There are 8 entrances, so the idea that the building looks out in 8 directions and, calls people from all directions. This is the knowledge center, right? So this idea of the building kind of calling out to people. And this is, of course, the large foyers which you actually basically enter. All natural materials. We've got earth plasters on the wall. It's all kind of, hand-laid in situ, kind of terrazzo. The marble are from local quarries. So we really try to, work with local materials as, as far as possible. So this is just a kind of a clearer plan of the Satsang Hall as a whole. And to the south is where you have the main stage, which is actually where the Guru sits. And what is also quite interesting is as I kind of move into the interior that, within the main hall, which has the 4 intersecting arches, we needed a large amount of acoustics to make the Guru audible to about 5,000 people. And, this kind of concentric pattern of the acoustic panels, of course, also draws on the sky domes that you would find in kind of Jain temples. And that is the interior with 5,000 people seated. What's interesting is we only have chair seating in the balconies, whereas on the lower level, the ground level, it's very gently raked because the point was that the building should be able to be used for various activities and events through the year. So you can see the contrast of the raw RCC structure of the arches, to all of the acoustic paneling that is there on the ceiling or on the walls. And yeah, I mean, it's a pretty well-finished building. Again, we believe that the budget that was finally available to us to actually build this project, if you try to do this anywhere else in the world, it would probably cost 3 to 4 times as much. So again, just some more images of the actual central hall. And yeah, it was, it was hard work because again, we were working with contractors that were not proficient with form finished concrete. So it was often the office, climbing up the scaffold and looking at the precision of the actual form work. So if you see that intersection where the 2 arches actually meet, oh my God, we slaved over that detail. But it was actually executed kind of perfectly and, something we're very proud of. And again, talking about people, this is basically Hanif, and my goodness, I mean, he's again another saint. He was single-handedly responsible for the entire fit-out of the entire interior, and it was just unbelievable the kind of ownership that he actually brought to the project. His thinking, his dedication, none of this would have been possible without people like him, on our project. And the Guru and the team were there along the way, with us, where every single decision was, had to have his nod. And that was just fantastic because we had this amazing relationship, where we could slowly see that, even the larger team began to think and understood a lot of the design lingo that we would kind of, use rather loosely, and they would often throw that back at us. This is the core, the kind of spiral staircase that spirals around the actual elevator shaft as you kind of move up. And yep, again, this idea of this starkly, contemporary, modern, I don't know anymore. But, I just think it sits so beautifully against this actual Jain temple that you have there. And finally, this is, during the installation of the roof skylights of the meditation hall. So this volume goes up almost maybe 20 meters. And it's a beautiful luminous space, where you can just sit and you can actually meditate and, be in a space of kind of contemplation. So what's interesting is that you move from the discourse hall, which is essentially where the guru speaks, and then you begin to move upward to spaces of basically study, and finally spaces of introspection. So it's this movement from speech to silence. And again, just going on, this exquisite kind of marble work, the first 5 to 10 batches were just essentially waste marble that came out of the construction of the temple. But again, over time, just, working out the kind of knuckle joints with these amazing craftspeople, that we had who were working with us on this entire project. But, at the end of the day, it was fairly ordinary concrete, but, we basically figured how we could, where imperfection was actually transformed into something that was actually positive. Even the circular kind of windows, very simply detailed, which punctuate these large, kind of 40 centimeter thick walls. And just some images of, how these different surfaces actually, kind of interact, how they come together, the actual windows, during different times of the day as they pick up the kind of light of the sun. So yes, again, an incredibly rewarding project. Yes, we have won awards and all of that, but they don't reward the ecosystem. They don't reward everybody that actually came together. People are just actually footnotes. I'm going to end with just 4 or 5 slides when you come back to the village. And this is a project that's very close to my heart. So this is, we found this incredible site in kind of South Goa. About, I think it's 2 phases. The first phase is 4.5 acres, and the actual next phase will be another 3 acres, and just incredible kind of pristine land. And the idea over here really was that, how can I bring people together where potentially we could create a whole new imagination of, very simply put, how do you begin to create sustainable communities in ecologically fragile ecosystems? The story of Goa is very sad because it's just ecological disaster. Goa sits at the northern tip of an ecological hotspot which runs all the way down the Konkan. The entire Western Ghats are amongst the 9 most biodiverse, but also the most endangered hotspots in the actual world. And what's happening in Goa is so sad to see because of, so the idea really is that can we turn a real estate model on its head? Can we create a kind of community in this forest? So when I kind of brought people together, I said very, very simply, imagine that this project is an ashram, but the guru is the land. The guru is the ground. And as long as we listen to the guru, we can do no wrong. And I just love this image of my friend Karthik, who is one of the actual members of our little community. But, he has this incredibly busy life. He's a venture capitalist. He's out in the world. But this idea of communion with nature, I just think is something that, he is just now, so entranced with. And that, in a certain sense, is the idea. So this is my forest. This is our forest, and how are we going to live here? And essentially, we're looking at, essentially how are we, stakeholders, how are we stewards of this land? This was an ancient riverbed, maybe 15, maybe 20,000 years ago. Its geology is so unique. There are 4 active ecosystems at play. I've got a wetland system, I've got an evergreen forest and a deciduous forest. And we're building these homes, which will be completely carbon neutral, with earth that's going to be extracted and converted into kind of blocks, cold compressed, compressed earth blocks, glue lamination for all the actual timber roofs. And the houses gently float above the ground to simply release it from the ground plane to allow for the movement of flora, fauna under our houses. So guys, this is just like a little sneak preview. So maybe in about 2 years' time, I can come back and talk a lot more about this project. But our ambitions are that we want to be off the grid. We should be able to feed ourselves, except for maybe paddy, which is essentially difficult. But finally, what does it really mean to be a self-sustaining community where we are not just residents, but we are actively engaged, not only in each other's lives, but ecology and the site itself. Thank you.